Who are you?
You don't... I'm Jay Klein.
Oh.
Okay. I mean, I would hope you know who I am.
That's right. You
as
are...
people in a committed relationship.
That's right.
Running a new publication together that launched this week called The Black Sheep. I hope you at least remember what it is that we're launching and why we're here.
I remember. I'm just so excited about launching The Black Sheep that I forgot your name, my beloved partner of over a year. It's very normal for that to happen. When you're launching a publication like The Black Sheep, which is dedicated to highlighting the individuals who are willing to stand up against collective dysfunction. Individuals like the two that we have a conversation with in this video.
Yes. Do you remember who they are? Because
I do.
They'd be pretty hurt if you don't.
I do. I remember Colin Wright, who is an incredible black sheep figure in academia, who was willing to stand up to the gender nonsense around not being able to say the truth, like men can't get pregnant and other such once easily recognized truth. And also Christina Buttons.
Amazing, amazing journalist who is working with Colin to cover so many aspects related to that story, particularly the overdiagnosis of gender dysphoria in autistic youth, which is really groundbreaking journalism. So we love them. They're friends of ours, and we're happy to bring people a conversation with them. And if people want to see more conversations like this coming up very soon in the future, where should they subscribe to?
They should subscribe to We the Black Sheep on Substack and our YouTube channel where this would be published.
Thank God you remember that.
Just barely.
Okay, good. We have a great conversation coming up, and we hope you enjoy it, and we hope you stay with us at The Black Sheep.
Hello. We're all here. We're all in Nashville. All of us ideological outcasts, kind of, right?
I mean, pretty much, yeah. I mean, I've been talking about like biology and been outcast from that community for a while in academia, but we're all coming from different areas.
Yeah, and I've had my own story of like leaving the left and gaining my own perspective that's not as ideological, which is a lot similar to your story, right?
Former social justice worker.
Right. And you have your own.
I do, but I think I left the left like before all of you.
You did it before.
Because I did it, I became a libertarian in the Ron Paul era between 2008 and 2012, so it wasn't really even about the social justice stuff that much. I was already kind of in that school of thought when that started to kick off.
Should we introduce each other?
Yeah, I guess we should. Okay, but like not each other. Let's introduce ourselves.
Right.
So I'm Salomé Sibonex, a writer, artist, speaker, messaging strategist for the Foundation of Economic Education, and the de facto host of this little meeting.
I'm Jay Klein. I'm a writer and filmmaker.
Yeah, intros kind of suck.
I'm Christina Buttons. I'm a journalist, and I write pretty much exclusively about gender medicine. I'm currently writing and doing research for the nonprofit called Environmental Progress about autism and the intersection between that and gender dysphoria. There you go.
So I'm Colin Wright. I am a former biologist. According to Media Matters, I'm a failed spider biologist.
That's a great title.
I left academia because there was a lot of interesting ideas going around about the biology of sex that was pretty much insane. Like that there's more than two sexes, there's a spectrum of sexes, or maybe that sex is just a complete social construct and doesn't exist at all, and we're just making things up. I started pushing back against this, hoping I'd have sort of an academic debate. This is why I was in academia in the first place. And they just called me a bigot, racist, transphobe. And I kind of just doubled down on that, and you know, it's worked out since then. I kind of got to this conversation early, and I've really just been writing about this pretty narrow topic, and then have expanded to sort of the gender medicine area as well. But I've just been going hard on this for about 5 years now. So, yeah.
And we're all 4 friends kind of operating in the same space, and we're both couples.
Yeah. So that's the next question I wanted to ask is, why the hell are we all here at this moment together? How do we know each other? How did we come to know each other? So I guess I can start. Who did I know first? So I went to meet you. Yeah. It was the first time we were going to hang out. At the castle. Yes, at the castle in LA, which is so fun. And I remember seeing your Instagram account. We basically connected through social media. And I remember being so excited because it's like, it was early days for me of starting to push back and question a lot of the like really ideological, like woke leftist stuff that is really mainstream now. And you were doing that, and you were doing it so gracefully. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's in LA. Wait a minute. And then we realized that we actually lived very close to each other in LA too. And so you invited me to hang out at your castle, which is a whole story in and of itself. There's like this really cool castle in the hills that you were living at. And so I met you there that night. I think you were there too. That's when I met you as well.
Yeah, wasn't it like my birthday?
Yeah. Was it? Yeah. There's twice I went to the castle.
You were visiting.
There's a birthday and a holiday party.
He was visiting from Northern California. Yeah. We decided to have a party. You were in town for the fair video.
Yeah.
I remember you like doing his makeup and stuff before I put him on camera.
Yes.
Right. Awesome.
The fair video that you did.
Yeah, that's why I was there, huh?
Yeah.
The fair video.
Oh.
That was fun.
Yeah, so that's also when I met you.
Yeah. I mean, in a sense, we could say we all got brought together by that organization, the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism.
Oh my God, yeah.
You know, us 3 worked together there. And, you know, you sort of came into that.
I brought Colin on pretty early.
Oh, yeah. Well, you originally reached out to me on Twitter. You DM'd me, like, forever ago.
Oh, yeah, that was so long
got
ago.
your way into a job.
I wanted to get involved.
That.
I was excited about it.
Yeah.
And it was that Twitter space, actually, that I met Colin. It was like the Paul Rossi, Barry Weiss Twitter space. There was
I remember that.
There was a conversation afterwards on Clubhouse where I saw Colin and he was speaking, and I went and like checked him out on Twitter, and I'm like, oh my God. He's an evolutionary biologist and loves cats.
Failed spider bite.
Perfect.
I must have him. Yeah.
Perfect. And I slid into his DMs, and he ignored me for several months.
Well,
I had purple hair.
No, she had rainbow hair, so
No,
I thought I was
didn't.
getting
You were like, this is a trap.
social justice catfished, and they were
Right.
going to post some DMs if I was creepy at all. So
Yeah, but I was persistent in it.
I love that.
I mean, I think what drew us all to work at FAIR was kind of the same motivation we saw. I mean, their credo, their mission was to sort of push back against that ideological takeover. The people who are against free speech. Everyone has they feel pressure to stay silent on really important issues. So we kind of were at FAIR because they purported to be the organization that was going to be pushing back against this stuff. So that's kind of how we all found ourselves in the same area. And then you were doing your own thing on Instagram with your
you ended up doing
podcast and other stuff.
I did, yeah. Eventually I did end up working with FAIR. I've done like a speaking event and some other smaller things with them.
Yeah, you spoke to the Fair in the Arts community.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I did that too. Yeah, I was thinking about the panel that I did in LA.
But I had messaged you shortly after I learned about FAIR. I was like really excited to discover it because I was completely lost. I was just finding some other heterodox voices after working for this extremely progressive Instagram page that had close to 1 million followers. I just sort of defected from that, and I was asking, who are my people?
Yeah.
And then I reached out, and then it was a few months later they asked if I wanted to work there.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I think we all have that same experience of, what is called like politically homeless, where you're in that moment where it's like, this doesn't feel right anymore. This doesn't suit me. And for me, I also felt like these people that I'm like on their side right now would turn on me in a second. Like the minute I would question or push back on any of the ideas that I'm, currently in support of, you start to feel that like the grip tightening around you, where it's like, these aren't my allies, these aren't my friends, this is not a community or a space that is actually welcoming in any sense. It felt very much just like you either toe the line or you're the next target. And so I think there's like a period where each of us are kind of just like, you have to go out on your own and just break away from that and then figure it out after that. And I think for a while I spent this time just being like, I'm just going to talk about free speech and the importance of inquiry, like being open and curious and just kind of navigate from there. And it's a really cool thing because as you start to talk about the things that you care about, it just connects you to other people. That's how we kind of ended up being in the same like social circle online.
I didn't even know that the middle existed.
Right.
I was so locked into this like right versus left binary that like it took me a while to even find other people that also didn't feel like they fit into either one of those categories. But
is there like a time where you felt like you were self-censoring and it got like increasingly bad to a point where you had to speak up? Because from my experience in academia, I started off, I was arguing against a lot of like creationism, intelligent design things, but these are ideas that everyone in the academy already agrees with. So there was like, I could speak freely on those types of things. And it was sort of this incremental process where, you go to grad school, some of the professors will start following you on Facebook, and then you're like, oh, okay, you're kind of hyper aware that these people are kind of in control of my future a little bit. Maybe I won't post what I would have before. And what I realized is that through graduate school and then up until my postdoc, it was this gradual ratcheting down of what I'm willing to say until I'm like I find myself going back and unliking all the pages. Like I'm gonna unlike Sam Harris's page. I'm gonna unlike this. I did that. I did that. I unliked everything because there was one incident where some professor was looking at my stuff and found this was a completely innocuous picture. I went to like a metal show in Pittsburgh and I was wearing this metal t-shirt and I kind of had my hair spiky and I was going like that, or I was doing that or something. And then someone saw that and they like messaged my advisor about that, to saying like, what's going on here? Like this was incompatible with academia. So it wasn't even for speech at the time. It was just like, so I was like, okay, I'm locking down everything, until it got to the point where I realized like, I'm just locked, like everything is locked down. I can't say anything. And, I was looking forward. It's like, when am I going to be able to say anything? It's like, until I get a professor, until I get a tenure, until I get a postdoc. So yeah, so eventually I just sort of, was like the boiling frog. And I didn't get boiled at the end. I jumped out of it. But I mean, did all you guys have a similar experience? Like this ratcheting down?
That all at the time, actually. I guess like my turning point of becoming more right of censure was like a little bit more pre-woke. Because I graduated college in 2014 and I went to NYU, which is a very lefty school, and so I was there between 2010 and 2014, and there was like a lot of talk about white privilege and a lot of that sort of stuff. But I remember, I can't cite it exactly, but like if you look at graphs that talk about words like safe spaces and like things like that, they all sort of start to like peak in 2015. Like that's when it really just spikes. So I've kind of like just missed like the woke phenomenon while being in an academic setting. But for the time that I was there, I was having my own experience online, listening to podcasts, stuff like that, educating myself on Austrian economics and why I didn't believe that like, left-wing socialist economics were going to help people. And I was so excited about these ideas. I was running around film school, like talking about it, and then sort of like, oh, people don't like me very much. But like it never occurred to me to like stop like saying what I thought. So I kind of never self-censored.
You just had like this organic change of mind, or it was just like, this is what speaks to me now and that's what I'm into now.
Yeah. And then when I got out, I moved to Los Angeles, where I worked at the Ayn Rand Institute for a little bit. So already I was sort of into a world where that was going to be protected. Then from there, I went into the film industry, where that was kind of interesting. I wasn't like talking about politics a ton, but insofar as I was, I mean, it wasn't really a huge problem because, I wasn't like you know, like in the social circles of actors and stuff. I was with producers and like the business people and stuff like that. And, you know, they'll put on a show in public about how much they care about like certain ideological views, but, you know, they really just care about money. So kind of as long as, you know, you're behind the scenes and it doesn't hurt them in any way, you know, they don't really care what political opinions you have is what I found. But then I went into the political world after that, and, you know, I was on the right. So everything sort of that I was reading and hearing, you know, it was so concerning. I was hearing stories like yours all the time. But luckily I was in a place where I was safe and could speak out. And, you know, now the threat is, you know, if I ever want to leave that world or do other things, you know, what will my history mean? But I've been protected so far.
Currently have like your Twitter lockdown.
Yes, I do, but that's because I'm posting absolute nonsense while looking for my next
But
job.
you should be entitled to your nonsense. Like, I think we need to take things less seriously in that way. I mean, because we had this period in culture where people were digging up old tweets, and it's like, oh, you tweeted this thing when you were 15. Like, we're going to drag you through the mud for it, even though you're 25.
Well,
and that ethos is just like, it's a... when we are more charitable with people when they're in front of us, right? Like when we're actually having conversations with people in front of us, we're a lot more charitable with them. But when it's people online, when it's this whole like internet social sphere, people are so much more critical and so much more willing to just like give the least charitable interpretation of things, which I think is terrible. I think it makes us all like way more guarded. I mean, like you're describing exactly that, like feeling like I can't like the Sam Harris Facebook page, you know, and it's just like, what do we want at that point? It's not that people become better. It's not that like, oh, this pressure is going to make everybody become better. It just makes us become bland and hidden and guarded, where we're actually real when we're with our close friends, when there's not cameras, when it's not going to be, you know, proof socially, publicly. And I think that's very like an authoritarian thing. It makes me think of Cuba. It makes me think of like governments like this, where it's like you don't say what you think out loud, but behind closed doors, like with your close circle of friends, you say, yeah, that person really sucks. Like that's a lie. I don't believe that.
Okay, but so I agree with all of that broadly, but I think I would think we would all agree there's probably a line somewhere. Right? You know, if you're going to work for a certain company or have a certain position, you know, and you're saying all sorts of things that might make you a bad salesperson or something else. I mean, where is the line, you know, in academia, for employment and other spaces, and then just socially, which I think has a very different probably line. I mean, where is the line of this should be speech that you are not judged for negatively in any way and shouldn't matter and all that. And okay, I can have some doubts about you and maybe I don't want to work with you, even if I think that legally you should certainly be free to say
I guess each company has their own brand that they want to put forth. So if they have one of their employees is like very much off brand or something, I guess they're within their right to want to reel that in a little bit.
It's a weird thing though, because it's like you end up with people that it's like, you're dishonoring the Chili's that you work at, or like this is not Applebee's political position, and it's like that's they don't care, you know. But
it should be at least made clear that like what they expect you to do,
right,
what you can and can't do. You know, for my case, it was I thought I was well within the right, like as a biologist talking about the existence of males and females and that type of stuff.
Right.
But apparently that was
out of line,
beyond the pale. People are I always hear the whole like, you know, free speech, but you can't be. You know, you're not absolved from accountability. It's like, well, how should a biologist be held accountable for saying the most basic biological views ever? It's not like even a controversial area. It's not like race and IQ or something we're talking about. We're talking about just like this fundamental thing that has evolved like a billion years ago.
Yeah, but that's that weird kind of like a concept creep, right? Where it's like, oh, accountability in it. And it's like, I think what you mean is just like, I should be entitled to punish anyone for any views I disagree with, which is like, is that really accountability? I mean, I think that, it just creates this really uncharitable culture where it's like everybody feels the need to be self-censored, which is exactly what I went through too. And I came from it from kind of a strange way in a way, because I come from it like the background of being in the arts. And in some regards, like the arts is supposed to be the most free place. Like as you say this thing of like, oh, well, you know, like you can expect your employer to hold you to certain standards. I'm like, no, like for me, that's an immediate no, because to me, my top priority in everything is I want to say what I want to say. I want to do what I want to do. This is the most important thing to me. Like, I will quit my job. I don't care. It's something that I just cannot let go of. And I think part of it is because, like, I went through that past of being like, I can't say this. I can't question this. So now that I do, I'm like, I'm going to say everything.
I love
like, it's
that
addictive. Thank you. I love it about me too. It's like such a freeing thing when you get to the other side where it's like, okay, I actually value more my free expression than avoiding the negative consequences and accountability of that free expression. But then again, like, I work in the arts primarily. Like, my job is to be myself in some regards, and you know, that's a luxury, but it's also like I care about that more than having a higher salary. You know, like, if you wanted to be CEO of Wells Fargo or whatever, like, yeah, you probably shouldn't even be on Twitter, period. But like, I don't.
But even when you're like cultivating an audience or whatever on Twitter, like, you do kind of end up self-censoring because I mean, I'll say some pretty negative things about RFK Jr. because I happen to despise him, and like, you just watch the follower count go down, and it's like, do I want to like build and stay focused on, you know, the stuff that people follow me for, or how much freedom do I have to express opinions that people will disagree with? It's just sort of, you know, it's a trade-off.
That's such a great
I will never stop talking shit about that man though.
Hey, we were just at a fucking should I talk shit about him? I'm allowed to talk shit about him. That's what I do. We were just at a dinner. Like, it was like some super PAC you didn't go to it. No, you didn't go. You guys had already left. Hosted by him.
Was that the day that we left?
Dude, if you had bad things to say about him before, listen, like,
we heard from Michael Sherman.
Right. I will listen to your ideas, your policies, but if you starve me at a dinner that okay, I'm not going to be on your side.
Get fed.
Yeah, they waited till like the very end to bring out the food, and they were having him talk and answer all these questions.
Completely inaudibly.
Inaudible. So like, more than half the room really just had to sit there in silence with no food, waiting for the talk to be done because we couldn't hear it.
Yeah, they were filming an event that, you know, a speaking event. He was in conversation with Matt Taibbi. I'm sure it's a great conversation.
Yeah.
I don't know. I couldn't hear it.
Couldn't hear it. We were just there.
Yeah.
He said some things that were controversial. I didn't read too much about it.
That wasn't there. That was a New York fundraiser where he said like something.
The following day, we saw that. We assumed that it was.
I think it was the following day, but you know, he's all around making campaign stops. Oh, yeah. Or the event may have been earlier and just the video came out at that point. But he said, I watched the clip. He said that the COVID virus targets people who are Ashkenazi Jewish or Chinese less. This was attacked as, racist. I don't agree with that. Rabbis have come out and defended him. I mean, he was citing from a 2020 study that showed that there are certain genetic markers that are more vulnerable to COVID and less. He did not make the claim in that clip that it was an intentionally targeted bioweapon. He was saying that in the future you could have bioweapons that are doing this intentionally.
He's just very, very careful with his language.
Yeah.
Because he's a lawyer. But he always insinuates things I don't actually believe this. I'm just, posing this suggestion that other people have made that some other, maverick researchers and doctors have discovered that doesn't make any sense.
He provided the study link that he was getting that from, and I do think that's a legitimate political issue. Like, when we need to think forward about potential military threats, like the idea that we are potentially going to reach a point where weapons could target entire ethnicities and just wipe somebody out based on certain genetic markers that make them vulnerable. This is actually what the last James Bond movie was about. That was the No Time to Die. There was the Heracles virus, which the villain had, which, would target people with certain biomarkers. So, this is something that people are already...
Daniel Craig?
Yeah, this is the last Daniel Craig James Bond movie, and obviously fiction, but the point is that this is something that's in the public consciousness, something that people are starting to think about, and something that could potentially be of great use to genocidal governments. So I do like that. You know, I think you and I agree very much on RFK Jr.'s stance on vaccines, particularly childhood vaccines, and why, you know, his views are ultimately not correct about those. Right. But there's many things that I do like about him. I like his stance on the CIA and the FBI and the military-industrial complex.
I like that he's swole.
I
think it's awesome that we finally have like a candidate that doesn't look like they're like 1,000 years old or sickly.
It's a mixed bag.
I mean, you know, like I know that's not worth much, but when we currently have a president that's like falling down all the time, it's just like, oh my God, he looks like he might not fall down during his presidency. It's just like, kind of gives me hope.
I don't know. I'm not sold on him. Better candidates. Like people have so much time. It seems like it's been 4 years almost. No, has it? What is it, 2020?
It feels like it's been a long time.
Next year is 4 years. But, like, where we're starting to see people run and...
We're not allowed to have better candidates.
Why?
They don't want us. They don't want us to have better candidates.
It's like, look, it looks like it's going to end up being Biden and Trump again. I'm like,
why? This is hard to
You can't come up with anything better?
It's a two-party system with entrenched interests. You know, Trump destroyed those entrenched interests for the most part in his primary in 2016. But, you know, on the left with Biden, you know, the younger generation of Democrats does not believe the same thing as the older generation of Democrats. And, you know, he and Hillary like really almost lost to Bernie Sanders, which is a great threat to corporate donors. And so, I mean, of course, they're all going to fundraise and do whatever they can to within the rules of the system to, you know, get their person in. And, you know, that's what they've done. And
wait, who of us were Bernie Sanders supporters back in the day?
2016, I voted for him in the primaries.
Yeah, I don't know if I voted because I have like no memory of doing that behavior, but I was for him.
But like I voted for Hillary because that was not an option.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think I know a single person under the age of 40 who voted for Hillary in the primaries. Over Bernie.
I don't think I did vote in the primaries. Okay, but I did, in the presidential election, vote for Hillary.
But that's so interesting.
Do you think Bernie would have won?
I think it's possible.
Yeah, I think it's possible.
Really hard to know.
What would it be like now?
I mean, I don't know that it would be better. There's certainly things that I agree with Bernie on. I mean,
better than Hillary.
This is maybe
could have been him.
I think one of the areas that might potentially distinguish us from you two is that you two left the left primarily over social issues, and I think we primarily left the left a little over social issues, but primarily over economic issues.
So I first left over social issues. I think that, and then I learned about the economic side. And that was like a whole different thing to me, because I think that a lot of people, like, what draws us to the left is kind of the social issues. You know, like, if you're a person that primarily cares about social issues and looks at the world through that kind of like more social lens and emotional lens.
Economic issues feel like social issues when you're on the left.
Yes. And then you have that lens. You're looking at economic issues through the emotional, social, like, relationship lens. Yeah. Whereas now I have this much more nuanced understanding of economics and like a whole different understanding of what it means also to be right wing.
Well, most people are like introduced to politics through social issues. I mean,
yeah,
most people
especially for us, like, younger.
I mean, I guess it depends on your background or what kind of job that you have. But yeah, I still am kind of like lacking in like the economic.
I mean, I think a voting age of 18 is a disaster because economic policies are ultimately the thing that, you know, most dictate people's lives.
We don't know
after
anything
war.
about them like forever.
And, you know, at 18, like, how much experience do you have working, paying taxes, living in the economy, stuff like that? So
your policy is to raise the voting age to...
My policy is to return voting to landowners.
Okay, yeah.
That was once a racial policy. Landowners of all colors.
Oh, okay.
But you should have to own property to vote. You know, I think another controversial thing, I don't know if you two will agree on, coming from different ideological backgrounds, is, you know, I don't think democracy is a good thing. I don't think voting is inherently a good thing. I believe in individual rights. The founders of this country wrote very much against democracy. They included certain democratic systems as a check and balance, but ultimately, they were very against the idea that the will of the people, of majorities, should be deciding everything that happens in the country. Instead, they believed in individual rights, and democracy or certain democratic systems was only a tool to rein in a potentially tyrannical government. One of many tools. Another was courts and, many other things.
This is why, for me, I thought he was crazy when he was like, I don't like democracy. And I was just like, what is that? So you like fascism?
It's a libertarian thing?
Yes.
Absolutely.
But then I learned more. I was like, oh, okay, I see what that means. Like the idea, the tyranny of the majority and whatever. I still think that democracy is better than whatever is past it. But if we could go forward of it and have even more individual freedom where it's not the majority deciding how, the minority lives, then that would be ideal. Again, but that takes you further from democracy.
America was not founded on the idea of being a democracy. It was founded on the idea of being a republic where there would be people who were representing large groups of people. I mean, think about certain processes in our democracy.
Define the difference between a republic and a democracy.
Are we talking about states? Individual states? Those are republics?
No, the entire country is a republic where, there's a Senate of people who they vote, but it's not each and every one of us individually voting as it was, in historical Athenian democracy. But we forget that and we sort of act like that is how our government is supposed to operate. Think about the Electoral College.
Would that still work today?
Would what still work today?
I mean, the idea that you have not a democracy, but a republic.
I mean, yes, I think absolutely. I think it would work better.
So that's returning more power to the states is essentially what that argument is, right?
Yeah, I think
rather than federal government.
I think so, but
I thought we were getting at.
Right? Yeah.
Not totally, but that's part of it. I think even thinking about what you do when you go and vote for president. That's really changed over the history of this country. Right now, you feel like you're voting for Joe Biden or Donald Trump, but go back 200 years and, you thought you were voting for, an elector and the Electoral College. Now, that's just become a formality. But instead, this idea that there were people that were meant to represent you on a very local level that were, supposed to be the smartest amongst us. And you were voting for somebody that you trusted, to have the better information and be an intelligent person to then make those decisions at the higher level on your behalf. So it was a democratic process. You were still voting for your elector. But the idea that, each and every individual in this country knows who the right person, to be president is or other such positions, I think there's no reason to think most people are equipped to do that. What they can know is, who is it in their community that represents their values, that seems intelligent, that they can know personally because it's a small local thing. Small local government is drastically more effective. I think
this is what we need also because I think,
people are happy with their towns. They're not happy with their federal government.
You're over time. You're over time. I love it. I love you. You're doing the thing where you explain everything. And this is mansplaining. And it's amazing. But the good mansplaining. That's the thing. I am very pro mansplaining. I think it's great. They have so much knowledge and information. But you also have to be okay, let's wait. Let me direct this. So what I want to take about that is that one, I think that that's why everybody's so crazy right now is because there's this sense that this group is controlling everyone or that group is going to control everyone. And it makes us freak out because it's so I'm not going to be able to live my life the way I want to because this group is going to make us all live in this way. And it's if we could have a little more space from each other, right? Which is instead of fighting to make you live the way I want to live, I could fight so that you can live the way you want to live and I can live the way I want to live. And that's kind of to your point of that, going back to choosing community leaders as opposed to everything being on this mass federal level and the country is going to decide who represents everyone. So that's that. But then on the other hand, I want to talk about why it's so easy for us to have these kind of really contentious conversations that for a lot of people, the idea that you would sit here and just be I don't like democracy, that would throw some people out of the room. Like, they would become so uncomfortable. They would be really agitated. The fact that, like, I'm here like, oh no, I've kind of understood, like, right-wing perspectives. That already makes me a pariah and, like, unwelcome in a lot of, like, normal spaces, especially in the arts. And so to me, it's really fascinating to look at what makes us able to have these conversations where we can talk about these really moral, personal topics without looking at each other and being like, I'm uncomfortable with this and I'm judging you for that and I'm going to place a moral judgment on you as bad.
What if it was a tweet where he just said that? Where he had 280 characters and said he's not for democracy.
Yes, this is your answer to why my Twitter is locked right now. Yeah, because you know, with the projects I'm doing or trying to get, I just don't need my tweets saying like teachers are overpaid, you know, to be public right now with no additional explanation.
It's just different in person. You're much more willing to hear someone out.
Yeah,
it's different.
Well, I speak to my experience of being able to like speak out on things because for a while I couldn't, and I was, you know, I mentioned I was just ratcheting down everything I said for a long time. It was only really when I sort of left academia or got out of that environment where there was no one, you know, who could have my paycheck held for ransom from me. Honestly, well, I worked for Quillette right afterwards, and so you'd be hard pressed to get Claire Lehman to fire anybody for like what they say on Twitter, as long as you're not, you know, doing something completely bonkers. So because they're just a very free speech forward organization. But really, I mean, right now, it's the fact that I have a Substack. It's the fact that people pay me $5 here and there, everybody, you know, all the subscribers. There's nothing they can really take away. There's no one person they can send an angry email to about, you know, what I'm saying, and aren't I a terrible person? Does Colin's values reflect the values of your company type of thing? That's what gives me the ability to talk about the things I talk about now. And, you know, they've tried to come for, they went for PayPal, they went for Etsy, they went for DonorBox to get that.
Right.
And I'm sure they're trying to go for Stripe or something, but that's really the thing. And I've noticed, too, that when I was in like the most precarious time of my career, when I was a postdoc, not tenured, you know, limited, is my contract going to get re-upped next year? Have no idea of a million applications out there to all universities. That's when the activists like swarmed the hardest, because they knew that if they could just kick up enough dust around me, that they could just like tarnish my reputation, and then no one wants to hire me. But now, even though I have way more followers than I had in 2020 when all that was going down, I get nothing. Nobody. The activists. Every mean, you'll get some people down there, but there's no major campaign that like can't. It's because they know that it's just not worth their effort. They just know that there's other targets. There's people without tenure that they can. They'll go for Jesse Single. Well, he's got a Substack too, but Jesse, at least he tries to, you know, be of the left, and so they see him as like he's a heretic rather than like
right. It's that in-group out-group.
He's the apostate rather than the heretic. Is that? Yeah. So So there's that dynamic. I don't portray myself as being just like trying to be on the left. I don't really take the political labels anymore, and so they leave me alone now, which I think is fascinating.
I used to have people go after my individual like friends and other like influencers I knew online, and it was very disappointing. Wow. They all unfollowed me. Yeah. You know, they would get messages that said like, you know, you're following this person, she's a fascist, right wing,
guilt by association,
whatever, and they all pretty much all of them unfollowed me with that just the one message.
That's nuts, because that's actually what happens in Cuba, like a literal communist country. You have to be careful who you associate with, because people will be like, oh, I saw you talking at the little cafe with so-and-so, but I think so-and-so is a little bit of not a super sympathizer with the government, so what does that mean about you?
There were some people too that like I met in person and I considered friends, and they sent me a text saying like, I had to unfollow you. Sorry. I'm like, why? Stand up to them. It's just like a couple people on the internet with anonymous accounts.
I have the sense that we're all somewhat disagreeable.
I don't think I'm disagreeable.
Oh, you're the most disagreeable person here.
There's like colloquial disagreeability, and then there's just like the actual personality trait.
Okay.
Right. I don't mean like
you can be kind and disagreeable.
Yeah, exactly. I mean like you are the last person to be like, yeah, that sounds fine, if you don't think it sounds fine.
This is true, yes.
Yeah, and you have a habit of just being like, that's wrong. Then like explaining your position. You are not shy about disagreeing.
We all kind of do that.
Yeah, I've had to overcome that for myself because I think when I was younger and a lot more prone, it's such a good trait. It's such a good trait because it allows you to be an individual and to be authentic and to not get swept up in things that actually aren't good for you but are good for other people. And they use that pressure to make you feel like, oh, but you're a bad person if you're not coming along with me. And if you're susceptible to that, then it works for you. And then you kind of like neglect your own needs and your own instincts because there's this pressure of like, you're going to really upset people or you're going to be a bad person if you don't go along with this. And when I was younger, that was really hard for me. And it goes back to what we've talked about, like that politically homeless period of time where it's just like, I'm on my own. If I don't appease these people, I don't see a place for me otherwise, because what am I going to do? Like be like a Rush Limbaugh conservative? Like, is that my people? That didn't sound right for me. Like I had this conception of like what it's like to be conservative, and that didn't feel right for me. But I increasingly felt suffocated and dishonest being on the left as it is now. But there's just this sense of like, I'm walking into the abyss. Like if I turn my back on this group and start questioning these ideas, one, they're going to attack me, which you both just spoke to. And it's I think that's the exact fear that makes so many people unwilling to even question their own ideas about why they hold certain like woke or leftist ideas, is that they don't even want to risk having to become a target in the way they've seen other people become targets. Because that like, there's like a whole weird dynamic that goes on, at least for me, when I was kind of growing up and coming to consciousness about the world during the time when cancel culture was really kind of ratcheting up, but we didn't have a name for it yet. So it was just me, like this young person, very naive, watching people get basically abused and harassed online and thinking, I really don't want that to happen to me.
It's too much to take. A lot of detransitioners, they go viral and they end up deleting their accounts. And just, it's really sad because we need them to speak up, and it's not in any way comfortable. It's very overwhelming. I've learned to just tolerate it. I don't read the comments. I used to get that from the left. I'd get mobbed and piled on. And then I started getting it from the right. Because I am an equal opportunity of
right.
But I try really hard not to let it get to me. But not everybody can do that. I mean,
it's a
you
weird
get
feeling.
like, when it happens, it's like someone is confronting you in person almost.
Yeah.
Because you get the same kind of, like, your heart rate goes up and like, it's kind of scary.
But you can't do anything. That's the really messed up part, is that you have this physiological reaction of like, oh, wow, like I feel a confrontation, but you're sitting home alone. And you can't have a real conversation with this mob. It's a one-way attack. And you just have to sit there and be like, this is not right.
It doesn't matter, because even if you try to clarify, someone's going to take that out.
Often that's worse.
It just continues and it continues, and you kind of really just have to like let it play out and let people move on. I mean, defend yourself, make yourself as clear as possible, but then like don't get into it with people in the comments, because there's always going to be people who don't read your comments as charitably. How are you supposed
charitably,
to say that? And then it just gets worse and worse and lasts longer.
We've seen that, right? Where people try to apologize and be like, no, this is what I meant. Like, no, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend. And it's like, they've already made up their mind. Like, the jury's out. The verdict has been made. And your attempt to assuage, like, this group's concerns is often just, like, fuel to their fire.
And it's a lot of people who are just dumbasses with anonymous accounts who just want to troll people. So it's like, just let them tire themselves out.
Right.
It's like the most stressful thing you can go through. If you're not like familiar with the dynamic, because you just have the entire internet just taking a dump on you.
Weird.
You think it just keeps ratcheting up. You feel like you need to say something, otherwise it's not going to go away. You would do anything to get away. You're having like insane panic attacks. And I mean, my policy is like, if you actually think you did something wrong, you haven't just been convinced, if you're going to apologize, like, be very specific about what you're apologizing for. Do it one time and just be done with it. Because you see people who apologize once and then now you've admitted something, and then the mob, they just want you to keep repenting again and again.
Yeah.
Every single time.
There's a lot of issues at play in that, but I think the biggest one that maybe doesn't get discussed enough is I don't think humans were evolved to communicate like in this style, where we all exist in one space together. Like Twitter is the world's town square, or other social media platforms are the world's town square. We need to have small towns. We're like what you were talking about before about there being a heretic in the community, and the heretics are treated worse than the opposing army, essentially. Like, what happens when the whole world is now one community, and so all there's way more heretics because not everybody agrees.
And we don't care about the heretics in the same way. It's one thing if it's like, oh, there's heretic Bob, he's always acting up, we know him, versus like the sense now that social media kind of makes people feel disposable because we're way past Dunbar's number now, right? Like there is no sense of like, yeah, I don't like you, but like you're still in my group in some capacity. You're nothing. You're not even a person to people online. You're pixels. You're a username. So it's like, the road rage thing that we were talking about where like if you're in the car, somehow like you're enabled to treat people like total shit because, oh, well, they're just a car. They're not a person now. But if you're out of the car and you're both standing somewhere together, you kind of see each other's humanity.
I want to offer two solutions for this that I think most of our viewers will not have thought of yet, and I'd like them to consider.
Okay.
One, we should not all be under one government together, because when we, I'm a big believer in national divorce and the idea that however many nations America breaks up into, or even just a single state seceding or something like that, we need to be smaller communities where we are not controlling each other, right? When we have these social media, the whole world is in it, interactions, it's very much on the basis that, I'm a California progressive, you're a Texas conservative, and you, Texas conservative, because we all vote in the same system, are a threat to my way of life, and vice versa, right? If we can ratchet down the temperature by, first of all, making it so you, Texas conservative, can live in the way that the majority of people in Texas want to live, and you in California can live in the way that the majority of people in California want to live. That's step one to really ratchet down the temperature.
Put it that way.
Thing two is that once we've done that and we don't have to care, the idea that we're just constantly feeding ourselves with things that we disagree with each day, and and the idea of, oh, well, we're communicating with everybody in the world, right? It's not healthy. Like we should be in smaller online communities too, where we're blocking way more people. We're just by default potentially not seeing everybody all around the world unless we choose to opt into it. But we can't do that second step until we don't have to care what the other group thinks so much anymore. Right now, when Texas conservative really has to care about what Californian progressive thinks because California progressive is a threat, we can't then do that. All right, you go your own way and I can just tune you out. You don't matter to my life anymore. You be happy off where you are.
Well, this is why I liked the invention of Threads. Even though I think Threads, like the new Instagram version of Twitter or whatever, even though I was like, this is kind of like whack and sterile and weird, like I got on it. But I realized, you know what? Let the people that are really upset about Twitter being owned by Elon Musk and they're like, oh, I don't like Twitter. Go have your own version of Twitter.
That's where all the ad companies can feel safe.
right. You can be like, it's like this more like, it's like the SpongeBob, like Weenie Hut Jr. or whatever. It like very much like has like Weenie Hut Jr. Twitter energy where it's like, this is a nice safe space or whatever. But like, go there. And I think that this idea in some ways bothers people because it sounds like we're advocating for the opposite of unity, right? Which is like, in some ways, the transcendent principle that we're all seeking is actually unity, where we can all be very different and yet still be together. But like that requires boundaries and that requires respect, which is like, I connect with you through mutual desire, not because I'm forced to connect with you.
Those are great points.
Right. And I think when we're put in Twitter, like it's a crazy thing. Cause like I realized eventually I was like, you have people that hate Joe Rogan, like interacting with people that love Joe Rogan. When normally, these people would just never really cross paths because their entire lives would be separate. They go to different schools, they are working in different jobs, they go to different concerts, they go to different restaurants. Like, they're just different people, and they would have that culture and community that they want. But in Twitter, everybody's merged together. And it's kind of funny because it's like, you wouldn't go into like a really conservative small town barbecue place and be like a vegan and be like, this is bad, you all should stop. You just be like, I'm not gonna go there. Like, I'm gonna go to my Santa Monica like upscale vegan restaurant and be around the people that I like to be around. You know, it kind of speaks to that principle of selectively grouping yourself. But I think the way that we do this in a way that's not regressive and like anti-unity is that we're conscious of what we're doing, which is I'm choosing to be around people that help me to pursue the life that I want, and I'm consciously allowing people to pursue the life that they want instead of trying to make you be who I am, because I'm afraid that if I don't do that, you're going to make me be who you are.
I think it's a good point with like, as long as you're conscious that you're, you know, selecting a community that you're going to, because there is something, like, part of what I like most about Twitter is the fact that you are exposed to like so many crazy views. Like, oh, you see this one person who says something completely nuts, and it's just like, okay, they have the right to exist. I'm glad I can see them. I see you. You're doing your thing. I disagree with you, and you can comment or not. Yeah, you want to avoid the echo chamber, but you also want to make sure that you're not, I guess, being too influenced by what other people are saying.
Like torturing yourself.
I fully agree with that. Like, what I'm talking about should not be mistaken for censorship in any sense.
Yeah, and you don't want to be in the
It's just the default choice of what you're, like, filling your mind with every day. Like, people should be encouraged to get outside of their echo chambers and all that sort of stuff. But it should not be, oh my God, I'm scrolling threat, right? It's like, you should go into a mind state first where it's like, I want to see what other people think.
Which is what you're talking
might
about.
have their crazy ideas, and hey, they can have their crazy ideas, but it's not affecting my life. But unless I want it to, and then you go into that.
As long as you have the option to see those crazy ideas, rather than just having them like
and pretend they don't
and,
exist.
Removed from the platform entirely.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. I think that like that's the shift, but again, that speaks to the feeling of like you have to be in this safe, like kind of grounded feeling of like, me looking at a view that I really dislike is not going to trigger my like threat alarms of, oh my gosh, this person's going to come and force me to like trans my kids or whatever. You know, I can look and be like, that's real nuts. And then kind of...
I agree we need safe spaces so we don't get triggered.
What?
I'm triggered.
What kind of safe spaces do you want? Is this not a safe space for you right now? Or you want more of a safer space?
You just
safer spaces, not safe spaces, safer spaces.
Okay. All right.
Yes, we need safe spaces, but like you need to know that you're in a safe space, and you need to know when to step out of the safe space to like challenge yourself, right? Like I really try to do what you do, like with Twitter.
Value that.
Like yeah, exactly. And I think that's like the growth mindset is like, okay, when I look at this unhinged view, do I just get upset because it's like, I don't like that? Or do I look at this and be like, I don't like that, but why? And how interesting that they have that view. What makes them want to have that view? You know, like this curiosity towards it.
That was something that kind of had to be learned for me, I think. I mean, it doesn't feel natural to like want to have your views challenged.
Right.
I mean, maybe that's everybody, but like, I mean, for me, definitely, that was something I had to like, wait a second, no, this is good. It's good to sort of step out of your comfort zone and be challenged and challenge your views and see what else is out there.
As long as you can learn to like ignore the trolls, because Twitter is a good place where if I have like a half-baked idea, you can just put something out there, and you just get immediate feedback from a lot of people, a lot of the reply guys who just want to like show you're wrong. But if you just have if you're good at filtering, like, okay, this person's just an asshole, this person just called me a Nazi, whatever. But there's people who are going to be good and who are going to, you know, the good faith, who disagree with you because they're coming from a Christian background or whatever background it could possibly be. Twitter's the best place to get just immediate feedback on your views and give you perspective you never even thought of. So it's it's a great place for that.
I love that because like it speaks to this idea that I think of Twitter and social media in general, but like especially Twitter sometimes, that it's like it's this collective brain. You know, it's such a weird thing because we don't use it like that because we're very like in our ego when we do everything basically, where it's just like you, me, you're against me. I'm for me. Whereas opposed to we can just be like letting people bring in their other perspectives and just kind of like expanding our own perspective with that, like where you're basically just like tapping into other brains. And you have to have that sense of like, I still have what I have. Like, it's not a threat to me to hear this opposing view. I can just kind of like tap into this brain over here, tap into that brain. And it expands your understanding of things in a way that's like really kind of like you're doing science, like you're doing this experiment.
Or just ways where you realize how you're being misinterpreted. Because I find myself, I've had tweets being misinterpreted a million ways. So when I write articles now, if I'm writing something, there's certain words I won't use because I know, like, oh, I remember those million people commented on that where they took it this completely other way. Like, okay, what can I do to avoid the confusion there? And so, I mean, you get that feedback by saying a million ways that people can be confused about the language you use. It's a really good example for that.
Yeah. How I would love to hear how you guys have been able to reach that point of being less defensive, less like egocentric, or less just on edge about getting confronted on your views, because I think that's really hard for most people. And it's when you're able to get to that point of being like, okay, I actually want to hear the opposition, like I actually want to grapple with challenging views, it just jumpstarts your understanding of the world, because like you just take in more information.
You learn not to take it personally, because when someone lashes out on another person, a stranger on the internet, it says more about that person than it does whatever I said, you know? I mean, I think there's this experiment that was done on rats where they shocked the rats, and the rats that bit another rat after being shocked were able to reduce their cortisol levels.
Oh, that's so
I kind of apply that to like random comments.
We're just all rats biting each other.
It's something happened to them in their day. Something's going on in their life to make them want to lash out at people. And, you know, some of the criticism can be constructive and you can listen to that. So it's always, you know, but you just never take it too personally. I mean, those people don't know me. I mean, part of the reason we're doing this is because we want people to get to know all of us. Because Colin and I are mostly we mostly write. We're very, you know,
text focused.
Text-based. But, you just don't take personally. That's.
I feel like it was kind of my default, which is why I got into academia, where you know you can just float ideas out there and people would just take them based on their merits and things like that. So that's just kind of the place I tried to get myself to eventually, because you know I didn't realize that the academic environment would get to a place where that was no longer like a valued thing. You saw like Richard Dawkins, he would always say like he just float an idea like, why is it okay to identify as the opposite sex, but you can't identify as a different race? And then he would, you know, end his thing with like discuss. And then the idea of discuss would be like, well, he's not taking that position. He just wants to like have a, you know, bunch of ideas and see what people think about that.
Lost his Humanist of the Year award.
And he has the Humanist of the Year award strip, just because, even though he like prefaced it with and everything with, you know, this is just a thought experiment.
And it's a great one too.
And so I was always in that mindset. I've been a huge Dawkins fans for a very long time. So I was always in that mindset of the whole like, here's a crazy idea, like discuss. What do we all think about this? But then, you know, slowly academia became, you know, you couldn't even do the discuss thing. So that's kind of where we are now there. So I've gotten myself to the environment that I thought academia would be, which is now sort of outside of it in sort of this weird heterodox space now where you can actually say discuss.
Right.
I'm circling back on the same ideas again, but like I really feel that like to fix that, to make people feel comfortable with this idea of discussing, we have to get rid of their feeling of just constantly feeling threats to like their way of being and like their way of living. And until we make that like 70% of a person's day-to-day life where they just feel like I'm going to live the way I want in the community I want, but then I go into this place, academia or whatever else, for having discussions and for that specific purpose, then I think it'll be much easier versus when it's just constantly feeling threats. And then those, what were supposed to be discussion environments, they just feel like an extension of the threat environment.
Is there a way to do that with keeping like the state system without having all the states just break into countries? Because it wasn't the whole point of the states and states' rights was to do that, to sort of act as like mini countries within a country.
Yeah.
But it feels like we have all these elections, and then the first thing any president does is just like a bunch of executive orders, and they just basically just canceling the ones before, and then it's just back and forth. So there's so much at stake. So what can we do to get so the states are able to effectively do what you
I don't know if it can go backwards. Like, that's certainly the way that the country was founded. It was definitely the way that the country was founded under the Articles of Confederation. But it was, still much more states-driven under the Constitution as well. But the incentives of the system are such that, if you're a senator, if you're a representative in the House, if you're the president, if you're an administrator, your power and your ability to do what you want rises, as you take powers from the states. And so once so much has gone to the federal level, I don't know that you can just be like, oh, federalism is great, let's return it all to the states, because all the incentives just push against that once it gets to the point where the federal government is more powerful, because of course the states have the incentives to take power back, but the federal government's gotten more power, and once they have more power and they have the incentive, it just keeps rolling and rolling and rolling. That's why I think we have to push like a reset button and do some really large structural changes so that we can pull that back, because just passing laws that return things to the states, there's not enough of the will to do it, and we've seen 250 years of just consistent movement in the opposite direction.
Okay.
And that's not just the United States. That's worldwide, right? We see the same thing in Europe, where there were many sovereign states, and now there's the European Union, and there's benefits and negatives to that. But luckily, they've made it a little bit easier to leave, which is why Brexit was able to happen. So that sort of more significant structural change you can have there. Here, because of the association with slavery, the word secession is a very dirty word, and it's associated with all sorts of death and evil, and that makes sense given our history. But if you look at Europe and many other places in the world, this really helped people get along more peacefully. Sweden and Norway used to be one country, they divided peacefully. Czechoslovakia used to be one country, they divided peacefully. As I just said, Britain used to be part of the EU, now it is not. The Soviet Union broke up, etc.
Anti-globalism? You're not a globalist?
I think that's a term that needs disaggregation as well, because, I think free trade and I think cultural exchange and I think all that sort of stuff, that sort of globalism I'm all for. Global, one world government, horrific.
No world government. Worldwide anarchy.
Every nation is in a state of anarchy with every other nation, insofar as the UN is kind of powerless. And most nations are at peace most of the time. So, if it works on the global level, why wouldn't it work on the state level? Why wouldn't it work on the county level, the city level? Why wouldn't it work for individuals to live in that state? We create institutions that, help nations get along. There's international trade organizations that, countries sign on to and resolve trade disputes. There's all sorts of treaties. I think we can get along as smaller political bodies, by mutual agreement between those political bodies, because they're necessary. There's the incentives there to accomplish the goals that those political bodies and the people in them, want to accomplish.
Okay. So I want to pose a different question now, because something that stands out to me about what we all do is that we all kind of work in the persuasion industry in a way. We're all working with ideas. We're all trying to articulate ideas. And often we're trying to articulate ideas to people that disagree with those ideas.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating to me how often people that seem to care a lot about ideas go about espousing those ideas to people that disagree with them in the least productive way possible, which is, I'm going to insult you, I'm going to straw man your position and make it seem ridiculous, and or I'm going to just entirely refuse to engage with you. And we see that a lot with like certain leftist spokesmen for their ideas, which is just like, you're a Nazi, I'm not going to talk to you. You're privileged, I'm not going to talk to you. You're such and such, I don't have to debate you. And to me, that's emblematic of a position of power, which is, it's actually in my best interest not to discuss and not to debate with you, because that's the best way for me to retain my upper hand. Whereas for us, a lot of times, we're trying to push back on what are increasingly dominant cultural changes. And I think for us, we found it beneficial to articulate our positions in the most charitable, most open ways possible, which is like, let me really explain to you why I believe this, rather than making a caricature out of you and dismissing your concerns or your debates. So I really want to know from each of you what you think is the most crucial element for successfully articulating positions that people vehemently disagree with. I'll start with you.
So I'm mainly concerned with getting people on the left to agree with sort of my ideas about why gender ideology is bad, why there's two sexes, all that stuff. And what I try to do is try to sort of convince them that their current position is actually against the values that they claim to hold. Because this is why I became disaffected from that side, is because I saw that things like gender ideology were just reinscribing these sort of sexist stereotypes, and you're not a woman if you don't agree with like the stereotypes associated with femininity, all that stuff. And so I tried, the left is against gay conversion therapy. Like, well, this is, gender ideology is kind of, focuses on predominantly on people who are same-sex attracted, but it tries to change their body. So I try to just show them how all these ideas that they claim to support, just 5-10 years ago, are actually just completely inverted under their current belief system, whether they know it or not. So I try to show them that they actually agree with me, whether they know it or not, and just convince them that their current position is against what they're at least purporting, the values they're purporting to express out there. So that's a large part of what I try to do, is just show why their positions are actually against their core values. That's what I try to do.
That's interesting to me, because that requires you to really grapple with their actual values.
Yeah, I'm appealing to their values they already have. I'm not saying your values are wrong. I'm saying if you understood this issue more deeply, you would understand that it's actually in conflict with the values you currently hold. You don't need to believe in Jesus now. I'm not trying to convert you. I'm trying to just make you consistent with your own belief system that you already have. And I think that's powerful, because I think it's worked on a lot of people who've reached out to me. So in DMs.
And one of those values is the science. Trust the science. And the science is on our side. That we work in a very similar space where I'm sort of kind of honed in on the affirming model of care in pediatric gender medicine and adults as well. I don't think it's a helpful model of care. I'm not against medical transition for adults, but this very specific model that immediately affirms a trans identity without any kind of thought going into it, without any evaluation or assessment. And, one of the values that the left holds very dear to them, and I was the left like a couple of years ago. I'm kind of like, I still consider myself a liberal, but like much more closely aligned with the center, I guess. And one of the things they value most is the science, but the science isn't in support of gender affirming care. And I always point to the facts and what the evidence says. And the European countries that have conducted the systematic evidence reviews and found that the risks outweigh the benefits. And what the United States is currently doing doesn't abide by evidence-based principles. And, I reiterate that. I say it in as many ways as I can, but also it's helped a lot now that I work for a nonpartisan organization. I started off in conservative media. That was the only place I could talk about this stuff. I got into talking about these issues because mainstream media was completely ignoring it. They're a little bit better now. I mean, we have some great articles from Reuters and the New York Times that have really, I mean, they're game changers now that we have some like liberal outlets talking about this stuff. But yeah, I rely on my credentials as, you know, someone who voted Democrat in every presidential election to speak to people on the left. That's my main target audience, I guess, is.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to me because so often people shift sides and then it's kind of like they have amnesia for where they once were just recently, you know, and I have to confront that a lot for myself. In my work, my writing, when I'm trying to write in contradiction to ideas that are like anti-free speech and very, you know, like, oh, let's just do racism against white people, or let's just like flip, instead of misogyny, we'll just be like anti-man. And this kind of propensity that the left has to do equality by just like doing the same bad things but to a different group instead. So I try to speak to that a lot in my writing and highlight those inconsistencies and show that what you're really looking for is values of like kind of how you speak to. If you really care about equality, this is not the way to do it. If you really care about compassion, this is not how you do it. And so kind of like in a way creating new language that people can find themselves in to say, okay, yeah, actually, this is what I'm looking for. Like, yes, I care about women's equality, but that doesn't mean I need to shit on men. That doesn't mean I need to be anti-man. And so I create language that people can find themselves in to like resonate with those ideas. Because a lot of the times I think, at least for me when I was younger, it was like, yeah, women have had, you know, a rough go of it in history. And there's like all these, you know, issues that are unique to women. But the only option I found was feminism that was very like anti-man and very like resentful and bitter.
In gender critical feminism, it feels like it just sort of ramps up a whole bunch of hysteria about being in danger of men constantly, and I'm like,
right,
yeah, that's where I just can't call myself a feminist in any regard, really. I don't share a lot of those views.
Right. And I think that's the thing is like people find that this doesn't resonate with me, but I also don't find anything that does right now. So it's like, do I just go to the other extreme? So I try to be mindful of where I once was,
which is like, more people need to speak up because they need to know that others exist. Right.
There are other people that are like you.
The extreme views just are so loud on women.
Yeah. And I think people feel like, well, if I'm not extreme, then I'm just kind of like a pansy, or like I'm just like vague in my views. And it's like, you can have nuance, you can be reasonable, and those can be really defined and articulated views. You don't have to be extreme and harsh in your views to have a defined viewpoint. Yeah. And
First thing I would say, extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. You know, I don't think that having an extreme position or a radical position, you know, is inherently bad just because it's not at the center, just because it's not moderate.
It depends on what it is.
It completely depends on what it is. What you want to make sure that you're doing, though,
I'm
is...
extremely pro-cat.
Me too. But what you want to make sure that you're doing is, you know, when you get into an extreme or a radical viewpoint, it can definitely create that like us versus them dichotomy. And even if it sometimes literally is us versus them, you still want to like understand and come from a humanistic perspective, because you will be worse at your own goals if you don't understand where the other side is coming from. And I think that's the thing, that's the single idea that has most impacted how I do persuasion. And that really came from how my political conversion happened, which is, you know, I maybe happened earlier in my life than it did for all of you, but I was still 18 when, you know, I really started to become a libertarian. And before that, it's not like I was like, oh, politically neutral or not activated. Like, no, I was a full-on like socialist leftist. I would have been
I can't imagine.
I would have been a major Bernie Sanders supporter, like, had I gone on that way, no question. You know, I'm a local to the DC area, so politics is just like my culture. You know, I would watch with my mom every night, like The Daily Show and The Colbert Report and, you know, cable news and all that sort of stuff.
Watch those kind of shows.
Yeah, and so, you know, the issues that we were talking about back then, they weren't so much the social justice stuff that, you know, activated all of you, but it was things like, you know, universal health care is like one example. And, you know, I thought, or welfare programs also. You know, I thought if you didn't support, you know, just giving out money to the poor, or building shelter for the homeless, or, you know, having socialized healthcare, you just didn't care if people got sick. You didn't care if people, you know, didn't have homes. You didn't care if people couldn't eat. And there weren't a lot of Republicans at that time that were helping me feel the other way, right? My consumption of Republicans was very much filtered by the clips that I was seeing provided by the leftist shows that I was watching. But at the same time, you know, there were still certain moments where I had an opportunity to get more in depth with the other side's views. And that was when there was like a big political event that got everybody's attention, right? And those were often presidential debates. And so, you know, the Republican presidential primary in the 2007 election, that was really the start for me of changing. And there were many people on that stage who... 2007 for the 2008 election. Yeah. Or I guess maybe it was earlier in 2000. I don't know when they happened relative to the election. Yeah, it was probably 2008, but earlier in the year.
Was Obama and...
I volunteered for the Obama campaign. Because
Which one was it?
That was Obama versus McCain, is who it ended up being in the general election. And I volunteered for Obama in that general election. But there was a kernel in the primaries that started changing my view. And I was watching, you know, the Republican presidential debates. And, you know, most of the people on that stage, you know, were just saying things that didn't make me think that they cared. But then I heard from Ron Paul, who was talking about economics, who was talking about the idea that, no, I don't support socialized healthcare because this is going to kill people. It's going to hurt people. It's going to make people have worse healthcare. I don't support, you know, welfare program X, Y, and Z because here's the evidence that it's actually hurting people rather than helping people. He was talking in terms of my values. And now I've come to a point in my politics where I realize it's not that the other people on that stage didn't have those values as well, but they weren't talking in that same way. They weren't talking to me, right? And so, you know, I said when we introduced ourselves that, you know, I'm a writer and a filmmaker, but a lot of what I've done for my previous job at FAIR and before that is, you know, videos that I really care about speaking to the left because that's where I came from, right? And, you know, I ghostwrite for speeches for other people, or at least I edit things for, you know, people to say on camera. And what I always start with in almost every single video is just that person talking to camera, talking to their viewer, and saying, I care about the same things that you care about, right? And so if you care about those things, then here's why my ideas should be valuable to you. That was what changed my mind, and so that's just what I try and stick with and do for other people.
It's a good format.
Yeah, very good. It brings to mind a question, because you talk about the other Republican candidates weren't talking to you. And that's interesting to me because it makes me think about how social media kind of warps and manipulates who we talk to. Because I've seen a lot of people on social media, public commentators, whoever it might be, influencers, all of that, start speaking in ways that seem like they're at a rally almost. They're not quite talking to their audience because their audience already understands these points and knows it. They're definitely not talking to their opponents because they're kind of just dunking on their opponents. So there's this way that social media has created this kind of impetus
it
to
incentivizes people, like you gain followers that way.
Right. To kind of have this like almost political rally talk where you're really trying to give the least charitable perspective of your opponent as a way to rally the people that are on your side. But you're not actually really helping the people on your side to make any change or anything like that. It's kind of just like a political rally, right? Where it's like, don't those people suck? And it's like, yeah, they suck.
You know, I see that all the time.
Right.
I'm just like, why are you like contributing to the conversation?
So how do you, because we all do that. We kind of all work in messaging, and I definitely feel the pull as someone on social media that writes, you know, about ideas that I could easily just dunk on the opponents of those ideas. I try really hard to be mindful of who am I actually talking to when I write my messages and share this. And I'm really curious because you guys have quite large audiences. So you've been in the messaging game, you know, at a higher level where you are really likely to be pulled in by that draw to create messaging that's just kind of like, don't these people suck? Like, look at how stupid they are, and go to that lowest common denominator.
I see people surpass me all the time because they do that, but I just am not interested.
How do you stop? How do you avoid that?
I mean, I put on a conservative hat for like 6 months, and I tried it out. It just didn't fit.
Yeah.
But no, I did notice like those kinds of messages. I'm not someone to typically use like extreme language, but I got into it a little bit last summer. Like I think I used the word evil once, which is really
right. I have the same thing with that word. It's like, I don't want to use this word because it's so like
it's just
extreme and whatever.
I did. I tried it a little bit. Like, yeah, you do gain followers that way. It's like, you know, people want to follow you. You're speaking to them like you're somebody worth following, and you're confident, and you make them feel good about their views. I don't know, right? I'm too busy now working and actually trying to produce something that I can feel proud of, that's worthwhile. This report that I'm working on, and so I haven't been as focused as much on building a following that way. What do you think?
Well, I guess there's like two things that I do. I try to assume like the people who are saying crazy things online are doing so in good faith usually. So I don't assume that it's like a battle of good and evil. I also don't use the word evil very much. I assume it's just like, it's really usually just like good versus good. At least people think they're doing good. And so I don't assume bad intent. If I do like some kind of a quote tweet or something of someone who's saying something completely bonkers, it's attacking the ideas that they're presenting. I'm not saying this person's, they're not a groomer. They're not, you know, it's not nothing about that person in particular. It's like, look at these ideas on display. Here's why I think they're wrong. Here's why I think these ideas are harmful. I think this person has very good intent for what they're doing. They're probably a good person. We'd probably get along if we met in a bar. I just think they're misguided for reasons that they might not be aware of. So that's kind of where I try to go to in the discussion, so I don't devolve into just sort of the good versus evil, the partisan hackery that goes on. Because ultimately, I'm not doing a political project. I've just stuck by this idea where I'm trying to talk about ideas. I'm trying to talk about facts of biology, and I leave myself open to debates with anyone who wants to talk about these types of things. So.
Yeah, it sounds to me like both of you stay really focused on a higher purpose.
Yeah.
Really. Like you've got this clear-eyed vision for, it's not about what's going to get me the attention or what's going to get me the traction or what's going to get me the likes and the follows or whatever, which I think it's very easy for people to get pulled into that unconsciously. You know, not even thinking of like, I'm out for the likes, but it's just like, ooh,
there's people who live for that online,
right.
to build their following that way and just kind of comment on everything and post this really... crazy videos.
I just don't think that I need, I guess, help from like extreme rhetoric to make my point. I think that, at least with the biology of sex, I think the facts are like clearly on my side. I think I can articulate them really well. Yeah. And so as long as I can just clearly articulate why this is completely wrong, I don't need to like add flourishes and dunk on people. To me, that's just going to turn off the people who are actually care about facts. They can see that I'm just doing some other project. I have some other motivation that's driving me to do these things. I mean, I think a lot of the rhetoric stuff is because people don't have the facts on their side. They're afraid that their ideas are going to be critiqued. They don't want to have the debates, those types of things. So, I don't need that. I think I can just deal with the arguments as they are.
And like I said earlier too, I make posts a lot of times that I know I'm going to lose followers on because I do see more things that trouble me coming from the right. You know, there was a lot of backlash against even like the gay community now that I feel like compelled to say something about. And I always get, you know, piled on for that as well.
That's really interesting. I mean, I think you have integrity is what you're talking about, which is kind of a lost value today. I think there's something about the online world that really makes us play these short-term games where I'm not sure what it is, but people seem to get really drawn into these very narrow games where it's like, I'm measuring my efficacy in a single tweet. Like, did I win this argument? Did I dunk on this person? As opposed to having what you guys are articulating, which is this like, I'm looking for something bigger and I have these parameters for myself in the way that I engage with other people and opposing views, which I have for myself. It's really interesting. We've all independently said that we don't like using the word evil. That's something that I kind of have, I've had for a long time as just this weird personal rule that even though sometimes it's like, that word seems like it would hit right now.
Yeah.
I don't like to use it because it feels like a cheap shot a lot of the times. Because it's like, it's again what you say, most people aren't actually genuinely evil.
No, but they love those narratives of good and evil.
Like
And
a cosmic
it's a
battle.
story.
It's ancient, right?
People love telling stories. They
And
love
it's simple.
they want to believe that they're on the right side of history. Those words are powerful.
I actually do like using the word evil sometimes.
Love to have you in these conversations because
You
this
said
is
you
the
weren't
disagreement.
disagreeing.
I was just gonna say I love evil.
But
What actually, like, I want to hear examples of what actually is evil. What
So I don't tend to use. I think I agree with it with what you guys all said. I don't tend to use the word evil when referring to things that a lot of people already think are evil. But I think there's a lot of things that have just become so common practice or such, you know, that people don't think about it in moral language because it's just an everyday part of our lives. And to call that evil, to apply moral thinking to things that people just kind of take for granted, I think
is there
can be
real
helpful.
evil?
Okay, so, you know, I'm a libertarian, as I've talked about every time I've spoken to you. So, you know, what libertarianism is the non-aggression principle, the idea that the initiation of force or fraud against another person is morally wrong. And that is very obvious to people if we're talking about like theft or murder or something like that. But, you know, how often do people think about that for, you know, smaller government things, taxation, forms of taxation or regulations?
I knew you were going to take it to taxes.
Where if
Taxes suck. And I wouldn't call them evil, but I understand where you're coming from.
But I'm not,
and I knew you're going to do this.
I don't know if I'd call taxes broadly evil, even though I think that they are. But it's like, you know, if you're not thinking about the fact that, like, oh, if I don't pay, you know, this certain tax, that is going to go to fund a war that I don't agree with, you know, in Iraq that is going to kill, you know, a ton of civilians. Like, that is evil, right? Like, the idea that if you don't follow some meaningless regulation, if you smoke marijuana or, you know, whatever else, if you distill your own alcohol in a location where that, you know, might be a crime, the idea that, okay, either you're going to have to pay a fine for that maybe, and then if you don't pay the fine, you are going to be put in handcuffs, and you're going to be guns are going to come out, and you're going to be dragged to prison. Like, those regulations, those taxes, those laws, like, those are evil. And people need to think of them as such, and need to apply moral thinking.
So this is a really interesting point that adds a lot of complexity and nuance to what we're talking about. One of the first things that stands out to me as different in your usage of evil in this way is that we're talking about kind of like individuals and groups. Like people, like, you know, being like, oh, this person is evil, or oh, this, you know, kind of like that.
Actions are evil. You know, people, there's a Buddhist concept of people are formed by causes and conditions, right?
Elaborate.
In modern scientific jargon, you know, like each of us has a certain genetics that we are born with that predispose us towards certain things. And then we are born into a family, into a community, into a culture. And, you know, the causes and conditions that form us make us act in certain ways in each individual moment. And if, you know, at any moment when, you know, somebody's being aggressive to you, or you're not getting along in some way or another, like, you know, if you could just get into your own mind, into the causes and conditions, another phrase for that would be walking in somebody else's shoes, right? To understand why they are that way, you know, you might not be as angry with them. You might not be as frustrated with them. So, you know, I think people can often have very bad ideas or take evil actions, but much like people of many faiths, you know, I believe in forgiveness, you know, I believe in grace, I believe that, you know, people are not forever tainted by doing things that are wrong. People are redeemable. But that's people. The actions people took in the past, you know, those are what have moral character to them.
Okay, so it's very interesting to me because I do think you have a point in bringing moral language into things that we have forgotten to look at morally, because that is kind of one of the things for libertarianism that really just kind of shifted how I understood economics and government and systems like that, was because I had always just viewed things like regulations, right? Like, oh, you need to have a permit to open this kind of business, or you need to have a license to be able to build a shed in your backyard or something like that. I kind of viewed them as like innocuous things that, oh, well, they're meant to make us safer and there's a reason for them, you know, blah, 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 blah. I didn't see the other side of that. It took losing a lot of my youthful naivety to realize that every solution comes with new problems.
Like
which
paying
is,
taxes.
like paying taxes.
Taxes when you're...
And like when you don't do the thing, when you don't get the license, or when you don't get the permit, what that entitles the government to do to you, which is, you know, a lot of the times it's people trying to start a small business, right? And it's like, you can't start a hair salon unless you're able to pay, it's something like a ridiculous thousands and thousands of dollars to get licenses, not just for the business, but for every single person that's going to be in your hair salon. And if you don't do that, suddenly your hair salon can be subject to seizure by the government. And you can, if you can't pay, you go to jail.
Hair without going to jail, without a certain
right.
piece of paper.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like the other side of that entitles force against you that's like really life ruining, you know, which we see a lot of this, like I think it was like, what was it, Breonna Taylor that was killed in the issue with a no-knock warrant or something like that. So it's like you can look at these things and see like, okay, really terrible deep suffering is caused by things that we tend to not look at from a moral lens, like regulation, like certain laws. And so I think it's unique to libertarians, not entirely, because obviously like the left and the right use moral language for everything, but of their own choosing. But libertarians are the group that specifically introduces moral frameworks to systems and policies, not necessarily people, in a very unique way that I think is sometimes useful, but I think sometimes also really turns people off, because then there's like, taxes are evil, and people are like, oh, libertarians.
What am I...
Yeah.
Why isn't libertarianism more popular?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Straw man.
Well, okay, so, I mean, Jonathan Haidt has looked at the mental styles, you know, that lead people to certain political persuasions. And libertarianism, it's just like not a common like mental profile
It's for autistic
that people have.
and like
It's, you know, because
It's like its own thing on the moral.
It really is a unique.
yeah, because there's a lot of, you know, libertarians are like
Motivation.
high in systematic, like rational thinking, low in discuss sensitivity and like, you know, tradition. And still
money in
like
the party. Like if there was a third option, if there was a libertarian option that would actually stand a chance, I'd vote for it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, why?
we're in a two-party system, you know.
Yeah,
I
systems.
have many people I respect that, you know, worked through the Libertarian Party, but the Libertarian Party, in my opinion, is not a plausible political strategy for
Not
the
unless they
time
have a
being.
lot more money to campaign and.
Yeah, but ultimately, it's not even just that. It's that people feel that if they don't vote for Team Red or Team Blue, then they're throwing their
Yeah.
vote away, because that's just the incentives of a
But
first
if they
past
had
the
more of
post
a
voting
presence,
system.
I mean, couldn't we eventually?
There's been times in history where they've gotten quite close. At least
The
for
Libertarian Party?
state races.
And state races, yeah. I mean, Gary Johnson didn't come close to being president, but he came pretty close to becoming the senator from New Mexico.
Yeah.
I think there is a nationwide push for a ranked choice voting system
Yeah.
that could really change the way that third parties work. And I think so much of the political animosities that we've been talking about are really downstream of our voting systems and the incentives that our voting systems create,
Yeah.
where there are two tribes and the two tribes are really opposed to each other. We see a lot of political division in parliamentary systems, but I don't think it's as bad as it is here. I think that system creates better incentives insofar as personal animosity between different political preferences. So ranked choice voting would be great. In the absence of that, you got to work in primaries. Rand Paul is a libertarian. He is not the most pure libertarian, like his father. Mike Lee, the senator from Utah, is also very, very libertarian. There are libertarian Republicans, all across the country. I don't think we need the Libertarian Party to have libertarian politics. What we need to do is make more people libertarians and then turn the existing parties libertarian.
Yeah.
Which one?
Ideally, both. I mean, there's some more libertarian Democrats. There's Jared Polis, who's the governor of Colorado, but much, much, much less there. The Republican tradition really harkens back. Conservatism in the United States has a lot of libertarianism built into it, and by no means pure libertarianism, but what they are conservative to, and what separates American conservatives from European conservatives, is that what American conservatives are trying to conserve is the classical liberalism of the founders. And so for that reason, I think libertarianism is a much easier sell to Republicans. I think libertarianism is inherently a right-wing philosophy insofar as it accepts that, inequalities and outcome are okay, so long as everybody's standard of living is rising, even if they're rising at different rates. Somebody else getting richer doesn't make me poorer. A more functioning, growing economy can make all of us richer and better off.
And this is directly opposed to the idea du jour of equity.
Yes.
Which is, I think, one of the more pernicious ideas that is appealing to people now, because what I've found is that a lot of people conflate equality and equity.
They do.
Because they just don't know the difference.
They
don't
know
it's just been slipped in.
It comes in the package: diversity, equity, inclusion. Diversity I'm familiar with that.
Right.
Inclusion sounds
great. I love that.
But
what's equity? Must be equality.
It kind of sounds like halfway, like equality. It's got the first couple words.
Right. It's like, it's just an updated version of equality, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, actually, it's a justification for total control, because if you're doing better than me, I need to fix that. So
it does assume a zero-sum sort of situation.
There's a philosopher, Robert Nozick, who proposed this experiment that I think is really helpful for thinking about this. Let's say that the basketball player, Wilt Chamberlain, is going to play a game. He was very popular at the time that Robert Nozick was writing. And, let's say that, we have all decided as a society that we are going to equalize all of our wealth and redistribute all the wealth so that we are all equal. But everybody, he's just such a great basketball player. We all want to give a quarter to see him play, right? Well, all of a sudden, he has become the richest person, and, the rest of us have all become a quarter poorer. Now we're all less equal. But we've all benefited from seeing this great basketball player play. And it was a choice. It was a choice, and he's benefited from playing. Did anything immoral happen there, even though there is now inequality, right? Justice defies patterns. And, you might think a certain pattern, if you're just looking at a snapshot of the economy, is what's just. But in fact, it's the actions that, create those patterns and differences and stuff like that.
Inequality is totally natural.
Yes.
Yeah, that's kind of a big game changer for me, was realizing inequality isn't inherently evil or bad. It's what makes us different. I mean, if you want diversity, then you kind of do need inequality in some ways, because we're different. That's true. Different abilities, different perspectives, different desires. I know a lot of people that have no desire to get a high-paying job and to be like career people. They don't want it. They're totally fine, like schlepping it, backpacking, van life, the whole thing. They're not having income inequality because of some type of systemic injustice. They are pursuing different things. That inequality speaks to their freedom to live the life that they want.
Man, we should just be in charge of the whole world.
Girl, I think about it every day. It's like, they just gave it to me. That's the one time I defy the libertarian principle is like, but if it was me that was in charge, then that'd be okay. Then I wouldn't be.
This is how it starts.
It's either libertarianism or I'm the emperor. That's it.
Well, that's the problem. Because everybody thinks that.
I think I'd mess it up real bad if I were in charge. So.
Okay, fine. You guys can work under us. Under Salomé.
This is why women are also dangerous. Because we're like, no, we'll be fine. We've got it. Give it to us. Give us a fact about wasps and or spiders.
Okay, yeah.
Do you want to contextualize why you're asking that question?
This is our failed arachnologist?
Yes, I'm a failed spider biologist. I was actually a very successful spider biologist while I was doing spider biology.
His advisor got into some trouble, and they sort of decided to associate.
Yeah, there's some weird stuff there.
Oh my gosh.
But I think one of the coolest things that I actually discovered when I was doing science had to do with wasps, actually. And it was that you can...
Did you make an actual discovery?
That's what my dissertation was. I have almost 30 scientific papers, and they each make a discovery in the natural world. You haven't read all my papers? Oh my god. Yes, I've made discoveries about the natural world. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten my PhD. So one of the coolest things I found was, and there's something that I thought was a cool experiment, because I studied social behavior in insects and arachnids, collective personalities. So just like every individual behaves differently, consistently across their lifetime, or can change, but there's consistent individual differences in behavior. That's what a personality is. So too do like groups can behave consistently different from one another based on their compositions. So what I wanted to test, and what I found, was that I can look at the wasp queen, because in the beginning of the spring, the single wasp queen comes out, at least in the species I studied, just by herself. She founds a little nest. She lays her eggs in it, and then eventually, she raises those little pupae, and they become her workers. So every colony starts with just a single individual who founds a nest. And I found that those queens, their behavior is radically different from one another. Like, some are very bold. I found that they would stand their ground on their nests.
Personalities.
Yeah, their personalities are the way they behave over time. Some would consistently defend their nest if you were to poke them and antagonize them. And some would just leave their nest right away and fly away if you just like poke them once, I was like, well, that's a very different.
Literally just poking wasp
I poked wasps. Yeah, yeah.
That
And
speaks
seeing
so
what
much to
happens.
your personality and your life situation.
Yeah.
Literally
Yeah.
poking the wasp nest.
And those are like very different strategies you can take. You can stand your ground and fight, or you can fly away and then
It's like the opposite.
and then you come back when the threat is gone. And so what I did is I like out of hundreds of these wasp colonies tested all these queens, over months to see their behaviors and see how consistently different they are. And then I waited till their workers came out, and then I tested the collective behavior of the entire colonies.
What were
And
you wearing when you were poking the wasp?
they're in these little cubbies basically, so I could test them inside these things.
Which was the more dominant personality type, the flight or the fight?
Well, so the ones who stood their ground, they were stinging the prod and everything like they were crazy. Like they're the ones who would more likely to sting you in nature. So what I found is the wasps that were more likely to fly away, the queens that were more likely to fly away, they gave rise to colonies that were more likely to have their workers fly and leave the nest but attack you. So the queen would leave, but the workers would attack you. Whereas the colonies that were from queens who stood their ground tended to have the workers that also would not really attack. I would vibrate their nests and have this little visual thing for them to attack, and it would be really difficult for them to actually try to swarm you. And then I did another follow-up study in the field where I looked as like, does this actually predict their survival of the whole colony in the field? And it turns out, yes, it does. The ones that are the queens that are more bold and aggressive tend to have colonies that survive better.
I got attacked by a swarm of hornets when I was a kid.
Yeah, so it was the first study that linked like the personality of a queen, of an individual, to the personality of an eventual collective behavior of a colony. So that's, I guess, the thing I discovered.
Oh, well, this is a bad discovery because it sounds like that's a
Sounds
lot of
pretty
inequality.
successful to me.
We need some equity in the WASP community so that they have the equal outcomes, because that's injustice.
They have like
Can you
slaves,
imagine
basically.
if like
They need
those
safe
kinds
spaces.
of equity initiatives took over
For like animals.
academic, and then you guys were like genetically modifying.
Girl, don't
species so that
invent
they
man-made
would-
horrors before they're invented.
This could be
You'll
be
speak
a
it into
sci-fi
existence.
movie.
I'm sure someone's already thinking about like inequality and like between pets or something. God knows what's coming down the pipes.
Was that the question you asked me? What did I find?
Yeah,
What was it?
Yeah, that was
Okay,
a great
okay.
answer,
Yeah.
actually.
I
'cause
never
I've-
get to talk about my actual work
Right.
as a scientist.
So I've never thought of wasps as having personalities.
Yeah, almost every animal does.
Yeah, we think about it a lot with dogs. With dogs and cats, it's so clear that they have really varied personalities.
Yes.
But with wasps, I'm just like, gross, get away from me.
Yeah.
I don't think about them ever any more than that.
It's just harder to test because you have to do like tests that can't be faked. You can't just give like them surveys and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, right.
you have to give like these clear signals, like this one's aggressive, this one's sociable, this one's gregarious and whatever. So
A gregarious wasp. Love that.
Did you create like a big five personality assessment for wasps?
I had a grant
so funny.
proposal where I would test for like general intelligence of like different type of species, and so I could directly compare different
gosh.
species of.
Do you think
of
what you're
social
doing
insects
now
across.
is more valuable?
It's more valuable. It's not as cool. Like
Yeah,
none of
yeah.
this cool stuff. It's not like I'm not on the frontier of research. I'm like going back like
I know.
hundreds of years to try to just like repair these like broken bridges, I suppose.
That's a really interesting
Girls
point.
What was that?
To say the thing that you always say, the joke that you always
What? I can't remember.
girls have vagina.
Oh yeah, I'm just
Penis.
I'm just like doing the birds of the bees for like everybody.
Right. This is it's a
Very
joke, but also
basic.
it's very serious because this is in so many different fields now. It feels like we're all getting dumber and going backwards because we're rehashing things that we had all accepted as true at least a decade ago. And now suddenly there's this need for biologists to say, no, we know what a woman is, we know what a man is,
Yeah.
as opposed to like poking wasps' nests and finding out that they have personalities.
I do want to say that can be good sometimes. I think we all agree that in this case it's absolutely terrible. But I think we might also all agree that there's certain academic fields, including the one that's making those claims, gender studies, that are just, they're built on entire garbage. And, you can have certain fields or areas of studies within fields, go on for decades, maybe sometimes even centuries, and be like completely entirely wrong. And once you have people that that's their profession, that got PhDs in it, you know, they don't go back to challenge the absolute like premises. And we need that much more often. You know, we need people to come in and shake things up and be willing to say like, hey, maybe this whole project is wrong and y'all are all, you know, wasting your time. Not the example you're talking about right now, but
one of my sort of like research questions, the thing that I'm trying to figure it out, is why do these like ridiculous types of studies like gender studies exist, where they aren't like producing anything worthwhile, they're just putting out nonsense, but they get paid to do it and people treat them as an authority. And it comes back to like the 1960s when like postmodernism was kind of introduced to the college campuses, and college campuses were like rapidly expanding, humanities departments were being developed, and it came during a time when people were very mistrustful of authorities because of, you know, the war going on and the civil rights stuff going on. People would meet at college campuses and they were very infatuated with postmodernism, that sort of the challenges authorities and their knowledge base, and then it kind of got baked into the curriculum, and we saw women's studies, gender studies, queer theory, all of that stuff come out through the decades, and it's just, they've been protected there. A lot of really bad ideas, a lot of really stupid stuff has been coming out of those departments for many years, which was what like the grievance studies affair exposed. And there's still like, what can we do about it? Like, I mean, there's an institution now, like there's
too much inertia,
and people trust them implicitly. People like, oh, this person has a doctorate, I'm going to listen to the person who is a gender studies major. Thanks. I don't want to hear what you have to say, spider biologist.
To keep harping on it, this is another reason why we need national divorce. Like, these ideas are so dangerous to a society, you know, just how just as much as communism was, potentially worse. And, you know, communism did so much damage because it took over these massive societies and then dragged them down for decades, and people couldn't get free. You know, these people are going to exist, and we need the rest of the world to be able to see that their ideas are a failure. They, as much damage as it will do, and it's not going to be good, you know, if we can contain them, give them their own tiny little country where they can run their experiment, living life by their way, and, you know, then we watch them fail when they have power, then the whole rest of us can watch.
Academia used to be that way. People used to think like, oh, just let them do what they do in academia, but then those ideas leaked out into the mainstream, and now like there's no way to contain them.
But those ideas weren't ever just ideas. They wanted to do something. You know, they had praxis.
There's activism baked into it.
And so, you know, let them do their thing. Just let them do it at a really small, contained level, away from the rest of us, so that they can screw it up and fail, and the rest of us who might otherwise be convinced by such ideas can watch them fail and realize, no, we're not going to do that.
I worry though with something like that, like if say there was a national divorce and blue states did what they wanted and red states did what they wanted, I would still worry for the kids in blue states.
I do too. It's not good.
Because I was a kid growing up in a blue state, and I always think about like what it would have been like if gender ideology were in vogue when I was a teenager. Like I would have almost certainly had, you know, been talking to you guys now with double mastectomy scars and
well, first of all, I think that like one big blue country and one big red country, number one, I have no idea how you split it up. Number two, it's too big. I want smaller. I want 50 different countries, 100 different countries, or at least like 5, maybe regional like corners of the country or something. But I agree with you, and it's not good. The best thing I can say about it is we don't live in a perfect world, and I'm trying to figure out how to limit damage, because all we can do is sort of, much like a human being, you know, we get damaged, we grow, we improve, you know, we're a system that reacts to harms and traumas. I don't think a world is possible where we save or protect everybody. I really, really, really
at least
wish
the fragmented model is like more difficult for the crazy stuff to take over the entire thing.
Yes.
But it's also difficult to make it eliminated to zero.
Yes.
So it's sort of, there's a trade.
Yeah.
It's a mitigation strategy. It's not perfection.
Yeah, it's a sad argument because a lot of the times when I hear these discussions about like, you know, puberty blockers for kids and all of these things, that it's like, really the argument starts to come down to, well, what are we allowing to happen to children? What are we going to do with children? And I find myself sometimes being like, well, you know, we can do as much as we can do, but at the end of the day, how far are you going to go to be able to say, I can take your child from you if you're doing the wrong thing?
That is happening.
Right. And so it's like, you know, where do you draw the line of like, well, I guess you're kind of entitled to harm your child. You know, like maybe we can do mitigation in terms of like not having it happen so easily, where doctors are just like, yeah, let's go, whatever you want, whatever, like we'll put your kid on puberty blockers secretly so you don't even know. But at the same time, where do you draw the line where if you're going to take your kid to drag shows, or if you're like, you know, like these weird, like really quite sexual situations where you see, you know, people post these videos of like, oh wow, a kid really shouldn't be there, but they're there with their parent. You know, so it's like, we do have systems that take kids from parents that are deemed neglectful or abusive. But I think libertarians would take issue with those systems because a lot of the times the systems that take kids from parents are easily abused. And do the kids do better in state custody? Not often. So, I mean, there is kind of this argument of, well, we want to minimize harm, but we need to be mindful of the fact that we cannot eradicate all harm, and there is, I guess, danger in trying to eradicate all harm, because what is the quote, the enemy of the good is perfection, something like that.
Well, that's what the other side thinks they're doing. They think they're eliminating harm by all the gender affirming care stuff. So again, it's this battle between good and good type of thing,
right?
Or at least different people's conception of what they think is good,
right? So. And this is why we need national divorce, so that Transistan, where people like trans their kids and whatever exists.
That's sort of how you propose to look at like California, is the same way we look at like Afghanistan doing female genital mutilation. It's just like, well, what are we going to do? Invade Afghanistan? The same thing.
Right. That's a good point.
I mean, I wouldn't allow these things in, you know, my society, but like these people exist, and we're not going to get rid of them by wishing them away. I'm not going to get rid of them by like genociding people who disagree with me. That's the strategy that some regimes in some places in the world, you know, have taken. It's just there's bad people who have bad ideas, and that's just a reality of the world.
But they need education.
Yes.
They need to know. I mean, the only reason people transition their children is because they believe they were born in the wrong body. They were born with a male brain in a female body, or a female brain in a male body. They have no idea that stuff is all crap. There's no scientific evidence to support it. I mean, people are born gender non-conforming. There are like masculine females and feminine males, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you choose to interpret it as, you know, transgender, where, you know, in the current medical model, the treatment for it is medically transitioning, like, and they end up on that pathway. Like, they wouldn't be doing that if they knew, if doctors were informing them. But there's a very good chance that this, you know, these feelings that they have with a cross-sex identity is they're going to desist.
Yeah.
Like, and like, I mean, there's at least a dozen studies between like 60 and 90%. They desist.
That's
and
incredible.
They no longer believe themselves to be transgender by the time they're an adult. Most of them are gay and lesbian, and now autistic. I mean, we have there's the same prenatal testosterone exposure that happens during utero. I mean, that accounts for a lot of the gender nonconformity you see in gay and lesbian people and autistic people. And those are the main, those are the cohort that we see the most at gender clinics, are gay and lesbian and autistic, or combination of both. But they're really just interpreting their gender nonconformity and through this idea of being transgender. And
that's so interesting. I think it makes me think of like in the past, you know, there's all these instances in history where people think, oh, it's a good idea to let your baby cry. Don't pick them up when they cry, because then you're going to teach them to cry a lot more. So that was the thing. And then later we found out that's actually really bad. If your baby's crying, you should probably go to them, because that's why they cry as an infant, is to gain your attention.
We don't want to let them self-soothe?
Oh, no, yeah. You know, you want your like 3-day-old infant to self-soothe. No. Yeah, that was kind of like this idea that for a while was, you know, don't pick up your crying infant because you'll spoil them. Yes. You know, and it's like, yeah, this is different from the logic of like when your 3-year-old is throwing a tantrum, don't immediately be like, do you want an ice cream? Yeah. You know, it's like that's all they have to communicate with you is crying. They can't even move.
Man, I'm terrible with that with my cat. I always give in right but I also should say, when we're talking about kids and not wanting them to medically transition, that's a separate issue from adults. I feel like if someone is an adult and they've tried everything else and they want to live a certain way, they want to live in a cross-sex identity, like, more power to you. Like, you know, should definitely exhaust all of the other options first, because that's a big commitment and there are a lot of side effects associated with those treatments. And, you know, but I have friends, we have friends that are trans, like, you know, a lot of times people online, they don't think of, I mean, a lot of people who kind of gravitate towards like the gender critical feminist or conservative space talking about these issues, they don't know anybody in real life who is trans. And it shows. Like, they're people. They're just like us. I mean, it's sad to see. It really is.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, that speaks to how it's easy to turn everybody into like a straw man, like a boogeyman or whatever. Yeah. And you see this really bad example of the thing, and then you generalize that like, oh, every version of that is the worst example of it.
Yeah. Part of the problem is the algorithm. Right. People get locked into these online spaces and echo chambers, and they just constantly see like the worst examples the trans community has to offer. And there are some really bad ones. There's some really bad examples there, but like when you're seeing it perpetually and you're afraid, you think like they're all like
that's all like that.
They're all perverts. And when I see trans people, I see like people who are like me growing up who are gender nonconforming, right, on the spectrum, or gay or lesbian. Like that's what I see.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer because I think all of us come from this place of being relatively socially liberal, you know, tolerant people, like all of these kind of, you know, buzzwords of the past that once actually made sense to us when we were like anti-racist, you know, we want equality, we are liberal, like all these ideas that once kind of just seemed common sense, which is I'm totally for you living life as you want to live, particularly if you're an adult that's not harming other people. It's not my business, you know, just let me live my life in the same way and we'll have that kind of like mutual agreement. And that seems to have largely disappeared, and it seems like we're having this weird cultural backlash where it's like both sides are getting unhinged, because you have the right that's falling into these tropes of being like just blatantly anti-gay, period. And then, you know, looking at all trans people as some kind of like immoral aberration that should not exist under any circumstances. And, you know, you just are ending up going back to that like cultural regression where you're just in a backlash response to these very extreme examples on the left, which are also unhinged. So I think we can sum it up here. You know, this is like, to me, what I really value about having conversations like this with people like you guys, and being able to call you guys my friends and boyfriend, not my friend, is that it's so refreshing to be able to just speak openly about things and be humanistic while you do that, and just kind of like listen to people and not be in this really defensive place. I mean, it expands your world, you get more information, but at the same time, it's just like, I think this is what we all want. in reality, it's like no one really wants to be this like really defensive, like super extreme, and like not in a fun way, not in like fun extreme, like I'm extremely free, like I vibe with that, but like just this kind of like I'm really intense all the time, everything is a battle, everything is good versus evil. That's exhausting. And you look at a lot of the people that are in that place, they're not happy. Like I look at these people and I'm like, you seem stressed at the least, you don't seem like you're fun to hang out with. Whereas like I'm so happy for my younger self that I'm here now, because I've overcome what a lot of you have also like spoken to, this, you know, this breaking out of feeling that need to kind of just like play it safe and be self-censoring and feeling like kind of you're in the wrong spot, and then finding your people where it's like you can be anti-democracy, I can be, you know, talking about Transistan or whatever. You can be poking wasps' nests and having the audacity to talk about biological sex. You can be doing these studies to find these nuances that no one wants to talk about in terms of like kids that identify as trans and whether it's actually autism and all these details that get ignored because everything in the public discourse gets turned into this extreme black versus white, good versus evil framework, and it just kind of is a little boring and exhausting and not insightful. So I will sum it up there that I'm really excited and glad that we get to have these conversations. I think it's great, and I hope that people will enjoy us sharing this conversation.
I want to hear more about your guys' relationship.
Should we do that?
Sure.
Oh my god, okay.
Bonus content. Subscriber only.
That's great.
Smash that like button.
Smash that like button to find out how we first smashed.